Welcome to the Wildland Urban Interface session for Small Firm Forum. Does anybody have announcements they would like to make? I have a couple. One
Why don't
is,
you go ahead? Sure.
one is August 10th. There's going to be a tour from Small Firm Forum of the Berkeley City Club. That's a Julia Morgan design. So that information will be available on the website for the AIA East Bay. And additionally, Chapel of the Chimes, which is another Julia Morgan building. It's at the end of Piedmont in Oakland. Was going to have a tour to the public on July 16th. And you can go on their website. So, pardon?
We've just got the advancer. Go ahead.
That's it. Anybody
Okay.
else? have-
Introductions.
Huh?
Would you like to make introductions?
Yes. We have a wonderful panel today, and I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl Buckwalter, who's our moderator and a very skilled person in addition. And she will let you know what we're going to do and how we will handle it.
Great. Thank you very much, Linda. So I'd first like to go around the room and let everyone introduce themselves. And everyone who is joining us on this Zoom session today, if you could please enter your name and AIA number into the chat if you are an AIA member, so that you get credit for the continuing education units. So who would like to start? Introductions. Anybody? Cynthia.
My name's Cynthia Tanyan. I am a landscape designer for 30 plus years. And actually I took a wonderful symposium on fire through, I forgot what it was called, Slow the Burn.
Slow the burn.
And that's where I met Cheryl and
Cheryl.
online, and it went over like 13 weeks. It was very intensive and thorough, and I got so much great information. And
Great.
Linda, we met in Pilates, and so I thought that, she asked for a topic and things, and I said, this is a great information to share with.
Thank you very much. So who else would like to introduce themselves? Your name and your business, please, and then we'll move forward. No, you all go ahead, introduce yourselves, please.
My name is Jennifer DeGraff. I'm a landscape architect, and I've been studying fire since 2017 when those fires came in October, July, or whatever that was. I do landscape architecture design work, consulting on fire, and education.
All right, thank you. We're going just quickly. Thank you very much.
I'm Cheryl Miller. I'm a registered landscape architect here in Oakland, and I've been with the Diablo Fire Safe Council since 2010, and I'll be one of your speakers today.
Thank you. And we have another Cheryl. We have three Cheryls here today.
Hi, I am Cheryl Drinkwater. I'm a licensed architect. I live in Berkeley. I was touched by wildfire back in 2017 when I was deployed as a volunteer professional safety assessor for the state, and wondered why are some homes burning and some are not. I did join the board of Diablo Fire Safe Council with my colleague Cheryl Miller a few years ago, and I'm working as the home hardening expert.
Great, thank you. And you all can learn more about each of our presenters. Their bios are on the website in the announcement. How about you? Name and business, please?
Yeah, I'm just Nicolette Mastrangelo. I'm a licensed architect at Berkeley, working on a project with debt extension in Berkeley, very relevant.
Very good. Thank you. Any other introductions?
I'm Donald Warlock, architect.
Great.
Linda Randolph, architect, Fremont.
Great. All right. And then if everybody listening on the Zoom can enter their name and AIA number into the chat, that would be great. And so I would like to first thank the East Bay chapter for having this event today and these presentations. And the recording of the presentation, there is a handout And then the PDFs of the presentations will all be posted to the chapter's website. And then AIA also posts the presentation, the webinar itself. And so I would like to speak about questions for just a moment and cameras. You can keep your cameras on, speakers off, please, for our visitors and attendees today, unless you are speaking and asking a question when we get to that point, okay? And then also for questions, we would like questions to be held until we get to the panel discussion, unless one of our presenters is talking about something that you feel you just need a little bit more clarification about, because we are on a tight schedule, but it will move along swiftly. So please ask your questions during the panel, and also you can enter them into the chat. Okay, so let us move on. And I would first like to have our first speaker, Jennifer DeGraff, come and speak about fire behavior basics. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. I'm Jennifer, like we said, and my email is at the end of this presentation, and my clicker's not working.
Oh,
Huh? Oh, aim it there. Oh, good Lord. Goodness gracious.
And also, if you have questions after today, please feel free to email the speakers.
Yeah, please feel free to email. It's still not clicking. I could just say next slide. Do you want to do that? Okay, let's do that. Next slide. All right, so our job as professional designers, landscape architects is to do the critical thinking. The ordinances and codes are written to be, I hate to say this, but somewhat general. They can't know every site, every building, every condition or circumstance. So it's allowed versus what would actually be wise on your project may not perfectly match up. And those rules and things are always changing because we are always responding to a variety of pressures, including the pressures of your clients' desires, their budgets, their risk aversion, and your professional judgment. So as I've been involved with fire and learning more and more, I've come to reevaluate some things I thought, better understand things that I thought, and so forth. And so we have a lot of work to do, a lot of heavy lifting to do to be that interface as professionals. Next slide. So I like to think this is new in my presentation, that our understanding of fire and the way we use our critical thinking and design skills is kind of like the way we are already thinking about water. You're building your building envelope and worrying about things like flashing and all that kind of thing. We've already internalized how water moves and how water functions, and we know how we need to respond to it. Now we've got fire that behaves very, very differently. And so we've got to internalize our understanding of fire. And I find it very intuitive. The more I learn about it, the more I'm like, oh, duh, that's, of course it would do that. And it's very, very intuitive, but it's even better to watch the videos that I included in the resources file. There's a PDF of some kinds out there, and those videos, I've watched hours of firefighters fighting videos. The people filming the videos are often former firefighters themselves, and they're talking over the video and discussing why things are happening in real time in a fire. I have no business being there. I appreciate that there's people out there who have taken these videos so that I can see it in real time and watch it. And so I would encourage you to watch those videos. Next slide. Okay, so fire ignites the next thing, either directly or indirectly. Direct ignition can be contact with the flame front or actual fire. But it can also come from the embers, and embers are the #1 risk to structures and fire propagation. Most homes in the Bay Area, at least, burn from the top down. So something up on the roof and the roof gutters or something like that grabbed onto an ember, ignited, and then it burned from the top down. I was stunned when I heard this because I always imagined a fire would come up to my house from the slopes below me, ignite my foundation or something near my front door or something, and go up. And the vast majority are actually the opposite. So let's look at a couple ways that fire can transfer heat energy and ignite the next thing indirectly, not so much direct contact from a flame or an ember. And I think this is kind of where that whole water analogy really comes in handy. So now next slide.
Did you try the?
Huh? Did you? No, no bueno. Do I have a battery? Okay, so indirect ignition happens by transferring heat energy from a flame. And that can happen in a bunch of ways that you already know about. So convection, if this person was to hold their hand above that flame, they would feel the heat, even if they're not touching it. If I open my oven, my hair blows back. That's convection. So I mean, if the oven's on, naturally, but conduction is heat transfer going through something. So if this person were to grab that candle down where it's not all glowy, they probably would be feeling cool wax, not even warm wax. And the closer you get to the flame, obviously, the warmer it gets. This is all very intuitive and we understand it really well. Radiation is that heat going outwards. So how they're holding their hand to the side, that heat energy is transferred by radiation outwards. It can happen not just in one of these ways, but in multiple ways. So if I hold my hand above the flame, I'm getting both radiation and convection, if that makes sense. So as that energy transfers, that heat transfers, all it has to do is ignite the next substance to the temperature of ignition, and something can catch fire. We've probably all played with matches enough to know that if you hold a match really close to this candle, it can burn and ignite without ever actually having to touch it. That's really what I'm talking about there. Next slide. So another intuitive thing is that with fire, size matters. We've all tried to build a campfire and you use kindling, you use something that's more dry, more brittle, finer size, more surface to mass, and it will ignite more easily than a big chunky, possibly wet log. So that size matters. It matters in how easy that material is to ignite, how long it can hold a flame, and the more meat on the bones, the more volume and mass to that surface area, the longer it's going to burn, the longer it can just kind of hang out and keep generating more and more heat. And obviously moisture content is a big part of that. Having enough energy from something already being ignited to ignite the next thing over can keep that fire going. And then I also feel like because so many structures burn from the top down and because embers are such an important part of this, is that material brittle enough or loose enough that it could make embers and that embers could get swept up and away with it? And next slide. So one of the things that's come up in conversations with other people is like, oh, well, I'm just going to plant a row of trees to be an ember break, and then they'll be hydrated and they won't burn and they'll catch all the embers like a big butterfly net and everything will be fine. And the challenge with that, though, is that if you have a scenario like this where a fire is coming up towards some vegetation that's taller, it's preheating through all that radiation and convection. It's preheating the air, it's drying out the air, it's drying out all the vegetation. And as it goes, it's making the conditions for its own life, the fire's own continuance, much more amenable to the fire than to squelching it. And so if you look carefully at the bottom of this diagram, there's a little 10 degrees there. If it was perfectly level and that fire was moving at however whatever rate it's going. If you increase that slope by 10 degrees, it'll go twice as fast. And then supposedly every 10 degrees is another doubling, which is really terrifying. I wouldn't expect to outrun a fire ever. So it will go with the wind in any direction that it's blown. It'll go uphill as a preference to going downhill, but it can also go downhill all by itself by following dry fuel and just heating the next thing and the next thing and so forth. Next slide. Okay, so getting back to that critical thinking path. Obviously, wind will send embers wherever. They're like plankton. They can't go against the current, and they can ignite something by direct contact. They'll bring that heat, and if it's enough, they'll ignite the next thing. The flame front is also super obvious for our critical thinking path as it's climbing up, following fuel. That's really intuitive to understand. You can see that everywhere. And having something burning nearby so that that heat energy transfers by an indirect means. I took a class on firefighting at Merritt College, and the best point I got from that class was that the biggest threat to your building is the building that's on fire next door. That next door building is the biggest threat. That's really terrifying if you know your neighbors. Is this the next slide? Whoa. Oh, we're on a roll.
There we go.
Okay, so the defensible zones were developed in the 50s and 60s as a theory. We've totally studied it now scientifically and demonstrated that the defensible zones were a good theory. They are there to delay ignition and to minimize exposure, to slow the fire's progress, to basically put tacks in its path as much as we can, to lower the flame height. Anytime you can take a fire, and I'm going to use this word badly, calm it down, literally down, and lower that flame height, the fewer things it has a chance to throw and just get it down where it's much more manageable, and reduce its intensity. When I first started this, I thought fire is fire. And I didn't realize that fires do burn at very different temperatures. And so being able to take that temperature down, literally calm it so that it's lower, slower, all of those things are good. And the main part of these defensible zones is to give whoever's in that structure a way out and give the firefighters a way in that's safe. They cannot go into conditions that are too unsafe. So they won't. They'll just hope to get people out and then wait until it's more safe for them. Next slide. Okay, I already mentioned the 50s and 60s. Most defensible zones are split up into the 0 to 5, that internal zone, the 5 to 30 or 30 and above. Depending on where you are, you may have zones that are interpreted in slightly different numbers, or they may chop it up differently. That 0 to 5 though is the thing. They've demonstrated through IBHS and studies and testing that 0 to 5, what they call the home ignition zone, is the for obvious, really relatable reasons, the most sensitive region because it's the closest to your home, and it's from the walls out, 0 being at the walls and 5 feet out. And when we call these spaces defensible, there's a lot of assumptions that I think, oh, goodness, that I think happen for lay people. They assume it will be defended. That's not necessarily true. We need to think of them as a way in and out, and they have limitations. So embers don't care if you've drawn a line in the sand. Okay, next slide. So the defensible zones are just demonstrated here on a modest house. I would skip all the nooks and crannies and just call the 0 to 5 the outside walls. And if there's a nook or a cranny, don't get too fussy about trying to cut those inside those corners. Next slide. Okay, so this is one of my side yards. It's 5 feet wide. the heck am I supposed to do when my path is only 2 feet wide and the whole property line is 5 feet from the building? So number one, home hardening. Number two, in the out of doors, we want things to be as clean and tidy, ember resistant, and difficult to ignite as possible. Next slide. And the 5 to 30 zone is pretty much just an extension of the same thing, but we want to also not forget things like sheds, pathways, long driveways. All of that stuff should also be defensible so that you have a way out and they have a way in. I'm going to skip that business about the neighbors for time. Next slide. Okay, so like I was saying, the way out along driveways, paths, trails, if you're counting on using a particular route to get out of your neighborhood, you might take a real close look at that. Or if you have a home that's more rural, really look at how you can get out of there. And what if the main way is blocked off? Is there another way out? It's not one and done. You've got to maintain these defensible zones. You can't just buy them, put them in place and call that good. Next slide. Okay, so maintenance for landscapes and buildings. I'll focus on buildings here. Hardening, obviously, gutters and roof debris, having those emergency kits and your go bag, blocked exits. I have a downstairs at my house and the back door we hardly ever use. And I was storing things in front of it. And then I started studying fire and I went, oh, okay, no, let's not do that. Making sure your smoke detectors are up to date, having fire extinguishers, and your electrical work needs to be compliant, needs to be solid so that it doesn't create heat and cause a fire. Next slide. Okay, landscapes are much more my jam. So hardening your outbuildings, sheds, pool, those little sheds that you put pool equipment in, all of that stuff. No trees should be overhanging your roof line. Your egress paths need to be clear. You want to keep the corners clean. You'll see that in the next slide. Doormats, this is something I picked up from Cheryl Miller. If your doormat is really easy to ignite, like those jute things, maybe it shouldn't be in your path out of the house. And not stockpiling firewood and mulch really close to your egress paths where it's easy to get to. We've got to rethink that. Next slide. Here we go. Here's some irises that I grow. Seasonally, they are more easy to ignite as they change over the leaves. And then other times of the year, they're more difficult to ignite. So when people want fire lists for plants, I get a little grumpy. Healthy plants and appropriately hydrated plants are less easy to ignite than stressed out plants. Seasonal cleanup, obviously, thanks to this slide, is important. Pruning your plants, your trees and shrubs for their health and not just shearing them into rectangles is important. Next slide. Keeping the corners clean. Anywhere leaf debris and dry little stuff and trash can get blown into, embers will collect there. So you've got an obvious, really intuitive way of understanding where your vulnerability to embers might be. Next slide. Okay, so the FHSZ is a mapping of zones dependent on some really big overview things like wind direction, slope orientation, and that kind of thing. It has nothing to do with how much work you've done to mitigate your fire risk. And these maps are used for planning, evaluations, property disclosures, policies, and I'm sure insurance companies. Next slide. So that's my email. All that stuff you just saw, like the FHSZ, that is in the resources file, and I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And now Cheryl Drinkwater will be presenting on protecting homes from wildfire.
Just a few things, testing. So I want to thank the Small Firms Forum for inviting me, the committee for inviting me to this panel, this W.U.I panel. Been really looking forward to it. I hope that you will be eager to learn more. Jennifer's talk is a great start to segue into mine. You're going to hear some repeating concepts. I'm going to just advance this if I can. There we go. It worked. All right. This is great. So we are going to be covering these areas. And I'm kind of curious, maybe in the Zoom, in the chat, I'm just wondering if anyone who has never heard of home hardening. I mean, everyone here in this room, I believe, has, but on the Zoom, I'd be interested to know. I don't know how many people are in that Zoom, but we're going to do kind of a quick deep dive into these sections, 5 sections in 20 minutes. It worked even pointing anywhere now. So home hardening. When I was in Paradise, as I mentioned, I was an inspector for the state. We saw a few different outcomes. We saw a number of homes that showed no damage. Some landscape structures and accessory buildings were damaged, maybe destroyed or damaged. But a lot of these newer homes survived. So they were built to the newer code. So that's something to think about as we go through this. Research shows that the risk to your home is likely to come from flying embers. This is something that Jennifer mentioned. Using science, we fortunately know a lot of the risk factors now that lead to these wildfire disasters. And we have a good understanding of it all through something like this image, which is the IBHS that Jennifer mentioned, Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They have this big laboratory in South Carolina. They build full-scale structures, and then they hit them with these fire cannons, which simulate embers, and then they study the results. And we're going to see another image in a minute. So home ignitions result from conditions local to a home. Again, Jennifer has been great at doing the background on this. So the vulnerabilities principally determine those ignitions, and this area of the home and its immediate surroundings is called the home ignition zone. So this was one of the first times we heard home ignition zone. This was probably almost 30 years ago by Jack Cohen. He is a scientist, a forester for the Forest Service. He's kind of the grandfather of home hardening. Fussy little thing. So this is just an illustration of showing that when we're talking about the vulnerabilities and home hardening retrofits and design, we're talking about components. And so just to throw point out a few of these little ember numbers, we've got siding, roof, vents, we've got near home vegetation, we've got all the fuels like benches and window boxes and doormats, all of these things, accessory structures like carports. These are all the things that we're kind of looking at. And I just showed the little diagram at the bottom that Jennifer was so great to go through in detail about the different exposures, embers being the one that we're really studying the most. And this is typically the responsibility of individuals, of the homeowners. It's really existing homes, retrofits, making changes to your home. But this can also happen in projects that you do on your home, additions and remodels. You want to address as much as you can at that time. And I'll go into that a little bit more in the code section. So a single residence actions are great, but it really takes the whole community in the neighborhood. And this is just the other half of that checklist. We have the little embers showing all those different components. Again, it's components, and all the things that we're supposed to be doing are listed on the left there. What we're addressing is the roof, windows, skylights, foundation and eave vents, siding, attached decks and porches, fences and gates. And then I go back again, maintenance and material intersections, which I will touch on in a little bit. So now we're going to move into the codes. This is an image on the right of that laboratory. Again, sorry, my formatting got a little adjusted with it converting to PDF, but this is Zone 0 research in the IBHS lab. And they built these 2 side-by-side structures. One is replicating a standard home with wood siding and wood door and a wood deck, and the other one, and no Zone 0, by the way. And then the right is showing the hardened home. And then they sent the fire cannons out, and then they studied the results. And basically, we've learned now that if we can clear that first 5 feet of combustibles, the home has a much better chance of surviving. So there are no home hardening code regulations for existing construction. So Zone 0 is kind of the closest we get to it so far. And this went into effect in January, but we're still kind of working out the guidance from the higher ups from the state of how to enforce. So the estimate that we've heard is that they will start to impose Zone 0 on new construction in 2024, and then existing homes will follow thereafter. So the point is things are going to keep changing. So our building code, we have our building code, the building code and the residential building code, chapter 7A and chapter 3A contains building standards associated with the construction of these buildings in wildfire fire prone areas. And the WUI codes, as we call them, were adopted to address these construction standards for new buildings. The requirements went into effect as long ago as 2008, which will come up, that date will come up again in my talk. And these are minimum, these are codes are minimum. I know Jennifer alluded to this. We can't cover every scenario. We can't impose costs on homeowners, blanketed costs. We have to do this. There's a lot that goes into it. I've sat in on these workshops, these code workshops. There's a lot of different things. There's manufacturers and code writers and engineers, and it all is really the minimum that we can ask. So chapter 7A and chapter 3 I mentioned applies to building materials, systems, and assemblies used in the design and construction of new buildings located in those 5 fire hazard severity zones that Jennifer alluded to on the map. So it can also be a local area. There's a local responsibility area map, and it can be any area that's designated by the local agency as a high fire area. So for example, in Berkeley, there is zone 3, and it only encompasses one little neighborhood, Panoramic Hill. So these codes, again, will change over time. I wanted to keep emphasizing that. And then also the new code cycle that went into effect in January now includes accessory structures. So all these miscellaneous structures have the potential to pose a hazard to the main home or to itself and other structures nearby. Berkeley is a dense place, for example. So those structures will be constructed to conform to the ignition resistant requirements for new permanent structures. And then these are components here. Again, these are the components that they're regulating under chapter 7A, which is how I'll just kind of blanket refer to the building code here on out. We've seen these components before in the diagram, right? Roofs and gutters and exterior walls, vents, windows. I won't even list them all, but exterior decking, you can see them all repeated here. And then I just wanted to touch on interior fire sprinkler systems. So the code for new construction is that 1 and 2 family dwellings must have a fire sprinkler system installed for interior. There is an exception, of course. The automatic sprinkler system shall not be required for additions or alterations to existing buildings that are not already provided. So if a main home is doing an addition or remodel and they are not required to have fire sprinklers, then that addition does not need to have fire sprinklers. But there are other considerations, and these are not in any particular order, but detached ADUs will have to comply with these fire protection standards, such as water supply, fire department access. And also, this is an option, right? You can voluntarily install an interior fire sprinkler system to protect the structure of the home. And existing dwellings that increase the square footage while adding an attached accessory dwelling unit, which is sometimes called a JADU, they may exceed the threshold that the local code may require, like 50%. If you pass that 50% remodel, they may require it for that ADU if it's attached. Exterior sprinklers. So this is the ones that we see on the roof. It's even in the report I sent to you folks this morning that, you know, a lot of people want to put these exterior sprinklers on, and I've seen them on the ground when doing inspections. They're really not recommended unless you have checked off all the boxes and you're fairly self-sufficient. One of the biggest concerns is water supply. You can't just take the tap on your spigot and turn it on to operate an exterior sprinkler system. So there's also effectiveness during high winds. Who deploys it and when? You know, these are just some challenges. And then the interior sprinkler system that we're referring to here was designed way back for life safety. This is about buying you time to evacuate, right? Life safety is the prime priority. And it was designed for interior ignitions typically. Okay, so we're going to touch on retrofits versus new construction. So it's much easier to build a hardened home from scratch. New homes can meet the requirements starting at the design phase. And we were talking about this before we recorded that, you know, there are over 7 million existing structures that are at risk for wildfire. We got a lot of work to do just to convince people with these existing homes to harden them in any way, whether we're doing a project or not. So this is one of the good examples to show for retrofit and for new is eaves, roof vents. So roof vents and eaves. This is a big retrofitting project that can be, you know, very simple and it can be very complicated. There are so many designs, right, for roof overhangs and roof eaves. So we probably all know that vents are designed to create airflow and remove moisture above and below the living space. but they also create air pressure that can draw the embers inside and ignite the combustible materials that a lot of us might keep in our attic or crawl spaces. So the code and the recommendation, the voluntary recommendation, is to use approved ember resistant vents, which there are many products. For example, the gable end vent here has a bushfire mesh, a proprietary vent that has a very tight steel mesh. We can retrofit an eave with a closed soffit, like in the example at the top. It can be vented or not, depending on the roof assembly. And we can did I already say that? Yeah, we can voluntarily screen the vents and retrofit eaves. And then here's the recommendation is 1/16 to 1/8 inch. So it's a smaller than say the vermin size, which is typically a 1/4 inch, to prevent critters from going through these vents. So now we're going to move into materials and design, which I think of as the meat of the talk. And hopefully my time is okay, but this is a demonstration that was done in Marin by Fire Safe Marin. They have an annual event now called Ember Stomp to educate the public. And so they build these little, they're like the mini versions of the lab. Stephen Quarles is usually leading it. He worked for IVHS. He's one of my heroes in this subject matter. So they build these little sample home sites using cedar shingle and typical home materials on the right. And on the left, they have a hardened, quote unquote, hardened home siding is fiber cement. They've got the vents that are ember resistant, the metal gutters, and then they built a little deck and they ignited everything. And then they studied the results. They illustrated to everybody that materials do matter and that your deck is also a huge vulnerability and even the little things on it, right? So the deck is maybe just even a vehicle for all those little things to ignite your home. It might not be the deck itself. So as you can see, the one on the left, the deck is pretty destroyed.
Sort of.
And then I wanted to touch on this subject. This is the Office of the State Fire Marshal's Wildland, W.U.I Products Handbook. And I just want to find my notes on here because it's a lot of information here. But so the products that are in this handbook have been submitted to the fire marshal, and they look at their standards, which I've listed here, the categories of the standards and the booklet, the handbook. And if they pass, they get to be put in the book. Not all products out there that comply are in the book, but this is just a way to sort of group it all together to make it easier for architects and homeowners and different manufacturers to sort of show their products. And all I would say is if you are considering using a product and you're not sure of it, to do your research, ask a lot of questions of the manufacturer and ask for the testing information and use that testing information. Possibly it will be required to submit for permit, but just do your due diligence. And I used James Hardy products here because they're kind of like the poster child for ignition resistant siding. But you do need to really read about this because even though like for a retrofit, somebody might just swap out their siding. If you're trying to comply with Chapter 7A and you are required to do a 1 hour rated wall, you're going to have to do a little bit more. And I'm going to explain that in the next slide. So wall assembly, we're in materials. So fire resistance rated refers to the rating of a building's wall assembly's ability to contain a fire inside that compartment and protect it from spreading. And so this is kind of like that 1 hour fire resistant rated wall example I just gave, or a 20-minute fire rated door. This is really, again, about life safety, right? This buys time. If you're in your home and you're trying to evacuate and the wall takes longer to burn through, then you have a better chance of surviving, right? And this can also help your home as well. So Chapter 7A has language that does cover this assembly, but I'm just going to read out: the exterior wall shall comply with one of the following requirements. This is the California Building Code. Made of non-combustible or ignition resistant material, heavy timber or logs, which are difficult to ignite, or the wall assembly can resist a 10-minute flame exposure according to this State Fire Marshal standard. And then I have the diagram on the upper right showing, like, say the exterior covering was a Hardy product, then the additional part of the wall assembly is this 5/8 type X gypsum wall board that you would add to that. And sometimes it's required on the inside of the house is typically a gypsum wall board. And so this is that sort of standard detail. Now, this could be a whole talk into itself, so I'm very much simplifying this. Other wall design considerations, provide a tight seal at the top and bottom of the cladding or screen with metal mesh. Stucco walls kind of have this built in, but we'll see a detail of that in a minute. Use fire resistant framing and cavity insulation like mineral wool. And also using mineral wool if you're using an exterior rigid insulation, use non-combustible. So here's some more about siding. So stucco, if it's 3 layers, almost 1 inch thick, stucco assembly installation. That's probably the easiest way to comply with chapter 7A for a non-combustible wall, as long as it's maintained. Using, you can use metal, fiber cement, please use to manufacturer's instructions. And on the right, I just show that, consider the edge details of your siding. And also with new construction, we are required to have a 6-inch minimum exposed concrete foundation. So this is kind of like a little bit of a vertical of your zone 0 to create a disconnect for those embers that may hit the side of the wall, fall down. If they have nothing to ignite, they're just going to extinguish. So the roof, I've got to speed up, class A rated or non-combustible roof gives the highest protection. Wow, my formatting went nuts here. I would have, anyhow. Standing seam, terracotta tile, and then class A rated by assembly. This is all underneath that image, but basically it's saying that you have to have another added underlayment material like gypsum wallboard or fire resistant, ignition resistant plywood. And this would create a class A assembly, roof by assembly. And then you want to consider all the details of the roof edge where the gutter attaches. And also if you have a 2nd story and a roof intersecting to, this would be more of a retrofit that you have flashing installed there to create a disconnect. Windows, the glass can break. I'm going to speed up. It occurs because of the differential in the temperature changes from both the radiant heat might be right on the center of the window glass, the rest of the glass is in the frame, so it cracks. Chapter 7A requires multiple panes and at least 1 pane of tempered glass, which is stronger. And window frame materials matter. Metal clad, aluminum, fiberglass, they're all better than, say, vinyl. So building design, wow, all my format. Simple versus complex forms. So on the right, we have a home that might be perfectly beautiful to have on the coast, say. Multiple roofs, lots of nooks and crannies, the floor plan, attached gazebos, huge overhangs, all these different places for embers to be stuck to. And on the left, we have a modern home by a Napa architect that is built for wildfire. That's what he does, and it's a box. It's got a flat roof. We may not like it, but it's got black corrugated siding. He's really addressing these issues. And then this is a firm in San Diego. I met this woman, this architect down in San Diego, and she and her partner have started a company that they have like a method, and they know exactly how much it's going to cost. They use all the same materials. They have floor plans. It's customizable. And as you can see, the form is fairly simple. It has shed roofs. They use box blocks, which are insulated concrete form blocks that get stuccoed. They have steel framing, insulated paneled standing seam metal roof, and aluminum windows. And then here's another architect building a home in the Sacramento Valley, and he actually consulted with me, and he's using class A membrane flat roof, metal fascia, aluminum windows, aluminum clad windows, fiber cement siding, masonry, metal guardrail. And then we have this firm, Indigo, Hammond and Play Architects in Davis. They're working also on a template for homes for victims of the Paradise Fire that use corrugated metal roofs, concrete masonry or stucco. And they're also very interested in off-grid solar battery systems so that there's the potential to shelter in place during the wildfire. Mm-hmm. And then we all know Arch and Tilt Architects here in Berkeley. They have been working in straw bale construction, clad in stucco for years. They have all these plans that they're actually giving away to victims of Paradise and other California wildfires. Another company, Bone Structure, they have a steel frame kit, very customizable, high-end triple pane windows, unvented roofs, and high performance insulation, which you'll have to go read about on their website. I'm not going to dig into the challenges of that right now. And then Design Horizons. Thank you. Design Horizons has a very proprietary kit, house that they are selling in Paradise called the Q Cabin. And they use steel framing and these non-combustible Quonset hut panels. It's kind of like a little kit of parts, and they're very customizable. And we're just wrapping up here, priorities and cost. This is a great diagram that I like. It's very simple to understand. It basically says the roof is your highest priority. It also happens to be one of the higher costs, but it is probably the most important thing you can do to protect your home. Jennifer talked about it. A couple of ones to point out is maintenance. Maintenance actually is the highest priority of them all. And I mentioned that at the beginning of the talk. That is not a design talk. That is a homeowner clean up your property talk, but there's lots of things you can do. And siding is another one. I get asked all the time, oh my gosh, I have beautiful redwood siding. Should I take it all off? And I say, no, don't take it off. I'm taking some of Cheryl's time. We already did it by pre-arrangement. Siding is one of the highest, and it's one of the lowest priorities. I just wanted to add that. And then this is the CAL FIRE low cost retrofit list. This is a lot of recommendations, some of which you just heard about here, and a lot of references to the fire state, the fire marshal's products handbook. And data being collected everywhere by CAL FIRE and others. This is a graph that shows for the campfire in Paradise that if you have a newer home, if the homes that were newer, no damage, almost 51% survived. Whereas the older homes built before 2008, almost 80% of them were destroyed. So newer construction to the newer code matters. And then this is a report from 2018 that shows that a hardened home is similar to building costs to a typical home. And very simplistic, they broke it down into just 3 components. This is Headwaters economics, and they show that it's about the same. Okay, so very simplistic, but they didn't stop there. They went ahead in 2022 and did a California edition, which I think is really very important. It's a great document. Everybody should download it. It has a lot of information and just about everything. And anyway, it's California specific. California is a special place. We're on the forefront of all of this, having structure survive. And they did another breakdown of costs, which I will just touch on. I wanted to show this graph. They basically show that cost should not be a barrier to building these hardened homes. And they broke it down into 3 different categories. They have baseline, enhanced, and optimum. Baseline being kind of the minimum code. You know, we can do a lot more, right? And of course, the cost goes up, but they're still showing, even between the 2 halves of the state, that it is about the same. Actually, that was a different letter. So to wrap up, I just wanted to think about these departing thoughts. We have to rethink how we design for remodels, additions, and new construction. And we may be able to do better. Codes are just the minimum. And we should encourage buy-in for these actions to homeowners with recognition that home hardening will increase the value of their home. And Cheryl's going to talk a little bit more about some of that. And we hope that insurance companies are going to be listening and watching, you know, and real estate companies, of course. And we should learn how to incorporate zero net energy and green building concepts into our apartment homes, our designs. And thank you very much. Here's my email and the resource list that you'll be given.
Thank you very much. And now Cheryl Miller will talk about what's evolving related to structures in the W.U.I.
Let's see if I have the touch. Oh, I have the touch for today. So I'm going to wrap up our panel and really bring it into what's evolving, what's going to be new. I'm going to cover 6 areas, and we're going to look at how the wildfire laws, and that really is our system of wildfire prevention, is that we have these various both state and local laws, and we have some enforcement mechanisms, but stuff is really changing. So I want you to think about these 6 areas are evolving, and they may inspire you to evolve your practice. We're going to start first with seeing if it will move forward in thinking about how do those laws really apply to us as professionals and as designers and builders. And the first most obvious is really the design related things. Your design is probably going to go through a plan review and have permit requirements, and you're going to be asked if you're working within a wildland urban interface area, high fire area, to comply with certain things. Your client may be even more concerned than the laws are. So you may have a client that's really worried about fire insurance, or maybe you're doing a remodel or retrofit or an expansion and they've had their insurance dropped. They may be getting ready for real estate sale or thinking about, or just have bought, and there's some issues with the real estate laws now. And then the last about this design related is just for your own business liability for ignition. They haven't come after designers yet, but they potentially could in these fires that are not quite as big. So you always have a liability with everything we do in our business. And then the second area is all about our professional standards. We hope that you've joined us today so that you do learn about what is the standard of care, what is your obligation to your clients, and then hopefully you're interested in more sustainable designs. And we clearly know that wildfires are with us to stay. The last thing is a funny term that we use in the fire area, which is called agency having jurisdiction. It's usually your local fire department and your local code enforcement, but sometimes there are big issues with who actually has jurisdiction. So understanding who's inspecting properties, who's putting down violations. If your client comes to you later and says we didn't comply, what does that mean? Because you'll find as I continue to talk that the local jurisdictions are kind of all over the map with how they enforce stuff. And that's just a big take-home message. You're going to hear me say it again and again. So here's the first, if we can go forward. Next slide, please. First thing that's new is you've heard both Jennifer and Cheryl talk about what is called in the law the zone zero. It's the ignition resistant area. It's that area 0 to 5 feet away from the skin of your building or from the edge of your deck. They count the decks or things that are attached as a part of the building. The state is trying to modernize their whole defensible space code, which will now come into this first zone of 0 to 5, but they haven't met the schedule. So for new construction, this has been in law. This came about after the 2017 and 18 fires. It was passed into law with AB 3074 in 2020. So it shouldn't be new, but it still hasn't been. It's not out there being enforced in any way that's uniform. Some jurisdictions will enforce it. Others have been waiting for this guidance. There was a schedule, as you can see on the slide, to have guidance and have it in effect for retrofit by 2023, and it just hasn't happened yet. The working group that was working last May, don't try to read the slides, but I'm happy to send you more information. They've been looking at that they'll have an area of things that are not recommended, stuff that's clearly ignitable. Vegetation, things like if you had a synthetic lawn or fences that attach to the building, those will no longer be allowed to be in the zone 0 to 5 feet if it's combustible in any way. Then there'll be things that are allowable. Think non-combustible, rocks, pavers, irrigated lawn, the non-woody plants there's no research on yet, but they keep saying they may allow for some. And then the third is going to be educational approaches. And I think as designers, we know we have to have HVAC systems nearby that are outside heat pumps. We have clients who want outdoor kitchens or want to have, barbecues, et cetera. So some of that stuff, it's life, your car, where do you park your car? Where do you plug your car in if it's an electric vehicle? How does that all work as non-combustible? It doesn't. So there's going to be some things that really are potentially going to be negotiated or potentially going to be very different as you work across jurisdictions of your local building officials. But my recommendation to you all as architects and builders is to own that area. Don't let the landscape architects take it. I'm a landscape architect, but don't let them take it. Own it. Treat it as a part of the building. Take your skin and think about what's happening in that 0 to 5 feet. Make it really be a part of your design. You've used it as compacting for your foundations. You've used it for your drainage. I would say to the architects, let's own the zone 0, the 0 to 5 feet. So that's my take on, I can't tell you when zone 0 will be happening. They keep pushing the date out. But don't be surprised when you go in for review if they talk about it, but don't give you much guidance. And unfortunately, that's the same sort of thing with all 6, but the second one is also confusing. The laws again went in for Assembly Bill 38, starting in 2021. The state is requiring to have disclosures and certificate of compliance upon sale. So this may be a client that you have who's just bought a property and you're going to be working on, and you should have a natural hazard disclosure report in all the stuff they've signed. There should be a list of vulnerabilities of the property, both from the defensible space. That one's pretty solid. But there is also supposed to be one about the home hardening features and the vulnerabilities. And so if you can grab that from, if you have a new client, has a new property, if you can grab that, that may help you understand what did the officials think were the issues. But it was supposed to start in 2021. It's kind of happening, but again, it's not very consistent across jurisdictions. And the real reason to also think about this is so that your design doesn't get obliterated when your clients get ready to sell and suddenly they can't comply. So just thinking about where are there parts that you're vulnerable and where are there things that you could help clients come over those vulnerabilities so that the certificate of compliance could be easier. The third area, it's always a mystery, is a brand new one. It came in with a 2022 code adoption, and the locals are not, as far as I know, applying it yet, but they will wake up and ask for it. And so this is a requirement for new construction to also include a project-specific fire protection plan. So far, none of my fire agencies have been reviewing these yet, but they will at some point talk about them, and they'll talk about not just the assessments like Jennifer talked about the location, topography, the history of fire, the bigger things. They're going to also want to know stuff about what are your plans, and they'll probably come to the architect because you'll get caught on the building permits for this. What's the plans for access and egress, road and address signage, stuff that may be beyond what your normal scope is. Water supply isn't typically your normal scope, but your client may need to find someone who talks about what is the water supply, what kind of fuel reduction and defensible space. And then the most obvious one is how your new construction or remodel meets the 7A and 337 that Cheryl talked about. Brand new, haven't seen, get it on your radar though, because it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. So the fourth area has to do with the insurance availability and affordability. And you may be thinking, why am I even talking about this? You guys are the designers or the builders. But if your client can't get funding, can't get insurance, they can't get funding, and your project just goes away. We are in crisis mode in California about availability and affordability of insurance related to wildfire areas. In June of this year, State Farm announced they were no longer going to write new policies. And in many cases, they're just not even renewing. And our insurance commissioner says, no, that's not enough. Fire is going to be with us. So in 2022, our insurance commissioner, Commissioner Laura, had rolled out a new program called Safer for Wildfires. It's on the insurance commissioner's websites if you're interested in it. It really takes all the things you've heard from Jennifer and Cheryl and rolls them in and starts to say there's stuff that we can do at the home level. There's stuff that we can do at the new construction or the retrofit, and then there's stuff that we can do at the community. And that's great for as people who live in California, but even better, he says to the insurance commission, the insurance companies, that there's brand new legislation right now that they are not going to be able to cancel. If you have property and you're insured, this is not yet law, this is what's under discussion right now. If you have property and you've done the things that you needed to do to comply with both defensible space and your construction, that the companies must not just do what State Farm did and said they can't write. The other thing they did in late 21 was start issuing some carrots, and they've got 17 companies. That's what this little, sorry, that doesn't work, the little circle. It's talking about that there's 17 insurance companies now that cover 40% of the marketplace that not only are committed to insurance, but also are giving discounts if you've done certain stuff. So they're starting to recognize that we're in it together and that the insurance does play a piece. And best part is if you incorporate the ideas you've heard into your designs, your clients should be able to show their insurer the actions. And we have an insurance commissioner who's ready to go to bat if there are more cancellations. It's not to say that insurance companies won't cancel or the whole industry might collapse, but I doubt it. Anyway, another area that to keep an eye on. The fifth area, which may make more sense to you, has to do with the housing demand. Certainly, we've had a big push starting in 2019 with legislation and new laws about improving the amount of housing. Our local jurisdictions now have regional housing allocations, so there's this big push to do more and more construction. I think we're going to seeing more ADUs and JADUs and what they call middle housing of smaller multi-unit things. So this whole idea of increasing housing, right now, the ADUs and the JADUs are done strictly over the counter, no discretionary actions, no way to really have any review, which is great when you want your design to go through, but it's also exposing you to a little more risk because there are not necessarily any standards yet. When you also can turn around and say there's a bunch of wildfire concerns that are not being addressed in any way, shape, or form. So the limited review and requirements don't allow for any specific looking at a setback or any sort of incorporation into understanding how the building may perform under fire. We are getting more pushback on the idea of density and concern of structure to structure ignition. So as you site or locate your ADU on property, pay attention to where the other neighboring structures are. Working just to your own setbacks may not be appropriate if you're thinking in terms of also how would fire ignite from wherever, from your ADU to other structures. We're really concerned about, from the fire world, and the number of people, increasing the density and the number of people to evacuate, especially if you think about the Berkeley Hills and the parking and the vehicle access, and just the firefighter access to the ADU. And you as designers can only do a certain amount, but thinking about the site and about how to, as a firefighter, know there's an ADU, how do people get out of that ADU? Where do people park? There's only so much we can do, but certainly the ADU guidelines right now don't have anything to say about fire. And if you're in a high fire area, for your own ability to sleep nights and your own risk of your firm, I certainly would recommend that you think through the things like the Chapter 7 or 337 and other requirements. And then my last is a little incentive, if it will go. Next slide. And that is that there is more and more information about sustainable designs and especially integrated climate adaptations. The state now has a new program that's called the Integrated Climate Adaptation Resiliency Program, ICARP, and they're very interested in integrated approaches. If you're doing interesting projects, they'd love to hear from you. This is through the Office of Planning and Research, and it's a great place to go look. You probably have multi-hazards that you have to deal with, and this is one of the places that you can get more information about the integrated adaptations, wildfire just being one of those of the climate. And I think I have one more slide to talk about, just that we have given you a short list of one page for references. There's a much longer and more expansive list that you can share materials with your clients, especially. Most of our materials in the Diablo Fire Safe Council are aimed at the homeowner. They'll help you, but they really will help your client. Everything from for you about navigating the rules. There are links to all the different code things. There's information about red flag weather and protecting your home and landscape and plants and vegetation management, which is probably more aimed at your client, but maybe really useful and helpful to get your education on wildfire up to speed. And then the last one, I think, is my contact information. And we're just really building our home hardening materials at Diablo Fire Safe Council. Cheryl Drinkwater and I are really interested in it. And so please reach out to us if you have questions or ideas of other information that would be helpful. And I think I will cede the time now to the panel.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Very good, thank you. And we do have questions rolling in. And there is one about the resources that have been mentioned. And yes, they will be online at the chapter's website. They'll be there with the PDFs of the presentations, the recording, and then the resources. So all those will be available to you. So let us go back to, I'd like to start with Craig, who Craig worked with you in Paradise.
Oh, great, okay.
And he wanted to say hello.
Hi.
Yes. So all right. So are there recommended Class A flame retardant additives for water-based stains and or oil-based stains on exterior wood siding?
So there are products out there.
You want to come up here?
Thank you. Hi, there are products out there, and some research has been done by Stephen Quarles, who I mentioned earlier, and they are not recommended. They have unknown longevity, and when do they get applied? How long do they last? They tend in the research to fade over time at various rates. So they should not be relied upon. And there are so many other things that you can do before you get to something like that to test that out. There's many other actions that you can take that have scientifically proven to help your home survive.
Very good. And one follow-up to that, how effective are fire-resistant wainscot cladding and how high above at grade level? What does that mean and how high?
Well, so when we're talking about siding, I mean, we have, non-combustible, we have ignition resistant. I'm not aware of a wainscoting fire. You're talking about only so many feet up a wall on the exterior. I don't know anything about that. Really, we want to address the bottom to the top if we're talking about exterior cladding.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Do we have any questions from the room here?
Well, just to tag on to what you said about the siding, I have a client who's on the east side where the wind comes up and she's up at the top of the slope. She has all these wooden arbors. And so we were planning on doing some stain on there just to kind of like slow and do anything we could on that, because right now they're just rough.
This is new construction or existing?
Still existing.
Yeah, I mean, anything in that first 5 feet in particular, if it is combustible, it is going to be a risk to the home. It will be a lot easier to ignite an arbor. And then once that's
That's the thing.
lit, then it's going to expose the risk to the home.
So these stains, we were looking at doing some kind of coats that we thought. at
I
least
wouldn't
would
rely
slow
on it.
down.
I would not rely on it.
Do you think like a regular application, like have they looked at that like
I
every
would-
2 years?
I would contact the manufacturer
Mhm.
and do again, your due diligence, research it. Ask those questions, because I don't know if it, from what I've learned I've even asked this question. I get asked this question actually every time about gels or stains or paints. And I've actually just emailed Stephen Quarles before and asked him, and that answer I gave you was what he gave me. It's the answer he gave me. You cannot rely on it. The efficacy is unknown, really. It is. And it might help it in some fires, but it may not help in the next fire. And then have you reapplied it, and who reapplies it, and when, it just fades apparently. So I would not, the best thing is just to remove arbors from that high risk exposure.
Mhm.
And to go back to actually wainscoting, I thought of another thought. If you have a house that's near you, like Berkeley is very dense. I love to use this example where I live. I know the lay of the land. Houses are very close together. Those facing walls need to be hardened more importantly than say one that is in the rear. Like if you only could afford to do one side, for example, that would be the highest priority, is whatever is closest to you. So whatever fuels are near you, whether it's a house, an ADU is another vulnerability. If it's not built to Chapter 7A, anything else, arbors, structures, sheds, neighbor's house, if they are within 30 feet, they can pose a risk.
And just to add, the Contigo, you're talking about stains, are you also talking?
No, I was talking about all of it. Anything that you apply that can,
External.
fade away or just
Good to know.
expire.
Thank
Okay.
you, thank you. We have another online question here, and that could be answered by anyone. Have you seen any good design ideas for Zone 0 incorporated into the architectural design? And Cheryl Miller's to the front.
I'll start. So I have seen a lot of different designs. And basically it's, as I said, it's the building taking ownership of how do they come down to the ground and how do they move out from the ground. It's using materials of whatever your skin is. If the skin of your building is stucco, then bringing in something that's a concrete that starts to replicate it. If it's a smooth material like steel, then a lot of it's bringing in those rock and concrete and really thinking about all the materials that we can use that don't grow. You know, even simple things like packed earth or decomposed granite, all that stuff is totally non-combustible. When embers land, just think about it. When embers land and whatever's there, you know, what is there to ignite? And so I've seen more in modern styles than I have seen in traditional homes, but I think we just need to think about it for both of them of what, you know, what materials and what does it look like? Jennifer, anything else
Anything
you
else
want
to add? Yeah.
I've seen some really beautiful images that I didn't own or have access to, so it's really hard to find good examples. We need more good examples, but I would also say, you know, when you're attaching structures to the house like pergolas and arbors and things like that, you don't want to be growing vines up that. It could be as inflammable as anything, but if you're going to grow vines and let leaves collect in them and stuff like that, you're shooting yourself in the foot after having spent all this money to have this hardened structure. So I would be thinking further out from just design and installation and construction to what someone might do with it. And I actually saw a presentation where this guy was advocating for metal arbors and pergolas. And then he had planted vines on them. So I was like watching this, not YouTube, the Zoom call going, what is he doing? Like, I don't get it. So if you're going to spend the money on that, be real careful about what might happen to it later.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Yes, sir. Donald has a question.
One of the neat takeaways I get from this presentation is the idea that if you're dealing with a client and a house in a WUI zone, you should make a discussion of the hardening of the house as a part of your initial investigation of what their real objectives are. That never occurred to me before. And I am doing a project, an alteration in a WUI zone. And the client did not come to me to harden their house. They have all these other ideas that are their key important things that we have to meet. But also what I found was, this is my experience, is that in the current residential code, chapter 7 on WUI does apply to additions and alterations. So what we end up doing is just like any other alteration, you apply the code to the area of the building that you're working in, generally speaking. So, you know, we're doing something here and something there, and we're hardening here and there. And I'm not quite sure how efficacious that is, because, you know, technically, if the emperor falls in the place that we've hardened, we've done a good job, but we really haven't done anything that hardens the house. And so I wonder how, you know, just the normal application of the code, if whether or not that really does much.
So I think the way that we in the fire world look at it is we're counting on attrition. That sooner or later, homes will ultimately be remodeled to some point, or they'll be burned. And so, I mean, I hate to be this blunt, but that is really the reality. But you're absolutely right that you're only going to protect the areas that you've done. And so when you're doing a remodel, you might talk to your clients about the vents throughout the house, or you might talk to them about, like, if the roof, you know, while you're doing construction, why don't you do the roof too? The big bang items, go back to that chart that Cheryl showed, and the big bang items of, you know, the roof and maybe the easy things to do. Maybe it's simple to box the eaves and you've bought something, but the vents are clearly one to try to keep that out. And otherwise, you're exactly right of how much can you do? And, you know, you may have that just your remodel, your addition's the only thing that survives.
Linda?
Oh, do you have any information about if you do swap out the vents? If the ones that have intumescent paint or some things like that, do you have to, I mean, I would think that they would be more airflow restrictive
Yes.
than a true, so maybe you'd have to add many more vents?
Yeah.
I can talk about that.
Yeah, sure.
Just to go back to Donald's consideration, though, that's why I mentioned in my talk that the code is the minimum. You know, that's the minimum that's being asked of you to do this project to pass life safety. They don't check even anything per inspection, right? It's just kind of, it's not a perfect process. So that's why you want to speak to the homeowner, just as you said, have that pre-meeting of, well, maybe at the time, the roof is a great example. We're doing this addition. Why not replace the whole roof if it's not class A or if it's at age? You know, we age out, materials age out. And that's the time to talk about what do the fences look like? What are just doing a quick zone zero assessment? You know, those are things like that we can do, right? The easier things, the swapping out of vents. So to segue to vents, I did do a workshop for the city of Berkeley. I guess that was a year ago, exactly to this month on vents. We did a deep dive into that and I was able to speak about the airflow restriction. Now, for most people, if they have enough vents and they're just swapping it out or changing the mesh, that's not usually a problem to restrict airflow enough, but it needs to be assessed. Say you don't have enough vents to begin with, or if by putting this mesh on, you are substantially reducing the airflow, then you definitely want to try to punch through if you can a few more and add vents. That can all be calculated. We have the formula as architects. Homeowners don't think like that. Homeowners don't have the formula.
Yeah.
So if you're working on a project, you know, this is one of those standard of care things to have that discussion with the client. But if the homeowner is just retrofitting, we're happy they're retrofitting. So we're not going to get too caught up with the airflow unless we see something really obvious.
Yeah, and interesting in talking about, you know, all of the construction, we have a question about safety refuges. You got it. And it's, you know, fire vaults, those sorts of things, fire bunkers. Is anybody working on things like that?
I can tell you from the experience of Australia that our fire agencies are not supportive of those. Number one, no one knows where you are. So you're much better off leaving early. This is what we tell all of our homeowners. Don't think you're going to stay. Don't think you're going to, I have a swimming pool, I'll be fine. You really need to think to get out. The idea of stay and defend was well adopted in Australia for years until the more recent deaths. I can't remember which year, which Black Sunday, but they have totally flipped. I think Rancho Santa Fe may still, down in Southern California, may still have their refugias. Workplaces like the Lawrence Berkeley Lab have refugias, but those are ones where the firefighters and the fire departments know where those are, know that there are people gathering there. They're not an individual vault. So we do not think it's a good idea. We do not recommend it to anyone. If it's something that you think there's some reason that it's such a good idea for you, I would have a discussion with your local fire agency about why and what you're doing, et cetera, because the worst is when they don't know when no one knows where you are. And
That's a very good point.
yeah, that's
Very good point.
That's the big take home.
Yes, great. Dan has, he said that he worked on a set of wildfire resilience guidelines with SOM in 2020-21. And if anyone's interested, he put the link into the chat. And he said that there's a lot of similar points there that the three of you have made today. And reach out if you have questions. So we have a few more questions here. Want to check in with the room. Any questions before I take some more from the Zoom? We've got several more in the Zoom. Go ahead, Linda.
I've always questioned the efficacy of a flat roof as opposed to a sloped roof that things could slide off of. Can anybody speak to that?
Maintenance.
Maintenance.
So maintenance, yeah. I mean, a flat roof, you're right, could have the potential to keep debris on it, but you saw an example of a slope roof can also, especially if it's a complicated roof, like one of the ones I showed, or where the roof to wall connection happens, like a second story partial, second story, and you have a roof intersecting. So any kind of roof can acquire debris. And this is one of those maintenance issues where it just has to be addressed constantly. The flat roofs can be made to be quite fire resistant. I mean, you can have a Class A built up membrane roof, and it's not wood, you know, well, unfortunately, it's a petroleum product typically, but it can be made to be by assembly Class A, and it will be quite resilient.
Great, thank you. Are there any studies regarding siding spaced off the structure for a rain screen, creating a space for embers to enter and then ignite the structure? Any studies regarding siding spaced off the structure?
Yeah, I mean, that is a whole subject, a whole talk that you could do on wall assemblies. And I kind of alluded to that because talking about wall assembly is really challenging into that time frame I had. you know, right now there's such a movement to make sure you have a healthy wall and have airflow like behind different types of siding, have airflow behind stucco, you know, it's all about that rain screen and airflow. So there are so many different scenarios. Yes, you can find information on it. I could get some information. There are building scientists who are talking about this a lot right now. You can find it everywhere, including Instagram. And I could get a small list to our moderator, and we could include that in the resource list.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see here. In the State Fire Marshal Guide to WUI compliant materials, the section for decking does not include any products or assemblies for decking guardrails. For example, minimum 5/4 inch cedar or redwood decking is allowed, but there is no mention if this is allowed for guardrail members. Has anyone come across this or have any resources, codes, sections that describe guardrails?
So in the sense of time with my talk, I had to take out the slide on decking. So decking is the only part that's regulated in Chapter 7A, is the decking. And decking materials in the WUI handbook, many of them are not non-combustible. There is wood in there. There's cedar, there's redwood, very strong lobbies. The manufacturers have very strong lobbies. They find a way to get themselves in that book and to be an approved product. Redwood can ignite, but typically the studies show that the decking, actually the deck, is not the most vulnerable part. It's what you have on your deck. If you have not cleared your deck, then all those little things will ignite the deck and then potentially ignite the house. So the guardrails are not regulated. There is a code for safety for guardrails. So the more non-combustible, my deck slide is out, so I having to remember all the things I had in there. You can make your guardrail out of metal or steel. You can make it out of larger timbers, which are more difficult to ignite. There are many design decisions you can make with guardrails, but it is not regulated for Chapter 7A, just the decking. So, yeah. So again, you're going into common sense or to think about how does fire work? Like Jennifer gave us so much information on that. I learned something today. I mean, this is great that, we all know now a lot of the vulnerabilities to the home. And so we can design just a hardened guardrail along with the deck and its location and how it meets the house.
Great.
Yeah, I want to add that with decks, there's usually a space underneath that deck. And somewhere in my computer is like a fact sheet of some kind. I can look for it. I don't promise to be able to find it.
We can find.
Yeah, but where the spaces between the deck boards is important. You do not want embers to get stuck in there and stay in there. You don't want leaves and twigs to be building up between your deck boards. It would be better for an ember to fly farther and land on something non-combustible like gravel or something that's underneath that deck than to fly less far, have more energy still alive in it, hit that deck, get stopped, and find something fruitful to pass that energy on to.
Can I add one thing on that?
Sorry to keep going on the deck. I just thought of another thing that I like to do with deck design is that you can get that adhesive bitumen tape now to use for flashing. We've been wrapping the deck joists with that so that when you have that space in between, at least if an ember lands on it, it has less chance of igniting than if it's full of duff, from plant matter and stuff. So that's been something I've been doing for a while.
Can I add
Hey,
one thing on
Donald?
this? So somebody mentioned about how the application of these rules can vary a lot by municipality. The project that I'm working on, a big influencer was the fire marshal for the fire district. And so for our decking, they required us to use fire retardant treated wood.
For the decking and the framing?
No, just for the deck
Okay,
surface. Yes.
Wow, that sounds rough.
yeah, interesting, yeah. And I wanted to add, it was more of a comment regarding the guardrails question that on his current commercial project in Monterey County, the civil engineer is actually putting together the fire protection plan. And so it seems like civil engineers are taking on this scope, but will vary by project and region.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yes, for sure.
That's, we have a civil engineer on it. But if you come into a project site that's already, you know, a buildable lot, you have no civil
Right.
engineer on it. So if you're asked as a architect, just don't be surprised, and then maybe find a civil engineer who's done them.
Right, there you go. Yeah. Let's see. Garage car doors are apparently exempted from national fire resistant requirements, but California does not allow this exemption. This is one company in California which provides such doors. However, Berkeley does not enforce this state requirement based upon current projects being built. Is this an issue for design in Berkeley?
Yeah, chapter 7A does address garage doors, but not so much the material as that it has a good seal around the door. So fewer people, unless they have a very high budget, are installing wood doors, real wood doors.
Mhm.
So the doors tend to be more in the steel, fiberglass, metal door, which I would believe is not, I mean, that door is not regulated that I know of. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't really know.
Mhm.
And in Berkeley, I have not come across that.
Mhm. Mhm. Interesting.
Well, for regular doors, it's either non-combustible or fire.
Right, for an entry door. Yeah, and then the
Yeah.
glazing is also regulated.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we have one more comment and we'll be just about ready to wrap up. Our last couple of minutes, this was going back to, if reasonably nearby, open parking lots affording 50 feet of paved surface, 100-foot defended space, or open meadows with grass, height of less than 6 inches have been represented by fire responders as last ditch areas of refuge. Very interesting. So that was from Craig also,
Oh,
Cheryl.
I just want to add that one of the things most people don't think about in the refuge is they think about worrying about the fire coming. That's not what's going to kill you. The heat and the lack of oxygen are the two things that you are going to be. So being in an open area, you're much better staying in your own home and having the fire burn over. And it will get hot, but hopefully it moves on. But the idea of, I know the whole thing is horrifying. And I stand here talking like this and that's
Yeah.
why we don't recommend thinking about, yes, it's true, the last refugia. Certainly the firefighters are trained to it. They often have shelters that they pop over themselves if they get, but no one wants to be burned over. And so you really have to think about focusing on evacuation and getting out and not having to face any of that. Those who have had fire or been through fire, I'm sure are cringing. Yes, yeah, I'm sure are cringing, but we recommend to get out early.
Yeah.
I think those are really good words of wisdom to end on. So thank you all. Linda's going to close for us. Thank you to our presenters. This was a very good discussion, and our attendees. This was very well attended.
And I want to thank everybody for coming, and it was a wonderful presentation, and it'll be available online for informing friends, neighbors, whoever. It's sort of invaluable, and we all want to invite you to we meet second Thursday every month from noon to 1:30, and we welcome any and all to come join us.
And
Thank you
Linda,
so much.
Is there a question, or excuse me, I think there's going to be a program that you all are thinking of planning for next year.
Yes, well, hopefully, we don't have it scheduled yet, but it'll be the zone 0 to 30. And how to handle that, and planting and materials, and we will get into developing that. And I think it will be an equally good program.
One more thing, Linda is the small firm forum host for this program, and we owe her a great deal of thanks for that. And all our programs each month are done by volunteers. We call them the hosts. And we all get together for a holiday lunch in December, and people volunteer to take a month. So that's how this all works.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Happy
you.
trail.
Thank you.